An arrogant CEO decides to test his mansion's new, exceptional chef, pretending to be asleep in the dining room. But what he truly witnesses, coming from the humble woman as she interacts with his daughter, is something so unexpected and touching that it leaves him utterly frozen. Cha Eun-woo lay still, eyes half closed, but his mind was in a whirl. The facade of deep sleep he'd hoped to maintain crumbled the instant Lee Ji-yoon entered the dining room, not alone, but with her daughter, Min-ji, who trailed behind her like a shadow, eyes fixed on the floor. The plan was simple. Observe the new cook under the guise of casual rest, expecting her to fail, like all the others. He anticipated impatience, perhaps a forced attempt to please, or the resignation that always followed a few frustrated attempts with Min-ji. But what he saw was different. Ji-eun didn't approach Min-ji with the usual anxiety. Instead, she moved with a calm that seemed alien in that icy environment. From the kitchen, a soft, comforting aroma began to spread. Not the opulent scent of gourmet dishes he was accustomed to, but something more homemade, more inviting. It was the smell of a light broth, perhaps a pumpkin porridge with a hint of ginger, something his grandmother used to make. Ji-yoon placed a steaming bowl on the table next to a glass of warm milk. She didn't say anything to Min-ji immediately. Instead, she sat in the opposite chair without forcing eye contact and began to speak in a low, melodious tone, almost as if she were telling a secret just to herself and the air. "You know, Min-ji," she began, her voice like a balm, "when I was little, my grandmother used to say that the most delicious food wasn't the most expensive, nor the prettiest. It was the one that told a story, and this one here," she pointed to the bowl with a gentle smile, "has a very special story. It's the story of a little son that hid in a pumpkin and only wanted to come out to warm the heart of someone who needed a warm hug." Min-ji, who until then had stood at a safe distance, arms crossed, slowly raised her head. Her large dark eyes, usually filled with resigned sadness, fixed on Ji-eun. Yun-woo felt an electric shock run through his body. Min-ji didn't look at anyone like that. Not at him, not at the nannies, not at the teachers. Ji-eun continued, her voice weaving a tapestry of words. "The little son in the pumpkin was a bit shy, you know. It was afraid no one would want it. But my grandmother always said that if you let it warm your tummy a little, it would warm your heart too, and then you wouldn't feel alone anymore." She picked up a spoon and, without asking, without pressing, offered it to Min-ji. "Do you want to hear the rest of the story, Min-ji? What happened to the little son after it left the pumpkin?" Min-ji hesitated. Yun-woo held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He expected the usual refusal, the stubborn silence. But then, to his astonishment, Min-ji took a hesitant step, another and another, until she was beside the table. Her small fingers reached out, not for the spoon, but for the rim of the bowl, feeling the warmth. Ji-eun smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. "It's warm, isn't it? Like a hug." Min-ji, still without saying a word, finally took the spoon. Her eyes met Ji-eun's for a brief moment, and Yun-woo swore he saw a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even hope, in them. She brought the spoon to her mouth, tasting the porridge. Cha Eun-woo's world stopped. He was no longer pretending to sleep. He was truly frozen, not by the chill of the room, but by the sight before him. His daughter, whom he couldn't reach, whom he watched wither in self-imposed silence, was eating. And not just eating, but she seemed to be listening, absorbing every word from a stranger who had just entered their lives. Yun-woo's icy facade, built over years of pain and disillusionment, began to crack. He felt a pang in his chest, an emotion he couldn't identify, but one that was overwhelming. It was as if, for the first time in a long while, he was seeing a ray of sunshine break through the dark clouds that hung over his mansion. And that ray of sunshine was named Lee Ji-eun, Cha Eun-woo remained motionless, his breath suspended, his body tense beneath the facade of sleep. What he had just witnessed was an anomaly, a break in the cold, predictable order of his existence. Minji, his daughter, whom he loved with a suffocating intensity but couldn't reach, was eating. Not out of obligation, not with her usual reluctance, but with an almost palpable curiosity. Each spoonful she brought to her mouth was a gentle yet powerful blow against the icy walls he had erected around himself. Ji-eun, oblivious to the silent storm brewing within the CEO, continued her story, her voice a silken thread that enveloped little Minji. And the little son, after leaving the pumpkin, realized it wasn't alone anymore. It found a warm heart to live in, and each time someone ate it, it shone a little brighter, spreading warmth and joy. It liked to think it was giving a warm hug from the inside. She smiled, a smile that wasn't forced, but genuine, and that seemed to invite Minji to share in that same light. Minji, with the spoon halfway to her mouth, paused. Her eyes, previously fixed on the bowl, lifted to Ji-eun. There was no longer the veiled sadness, nor the indifference. There was a spark, a glimpse of something Eun-woo hadn't seen in his daughter since her mother's death. Interest. She said nothing, but the way her lips curved, almost imperceptibly after swallowing the porridge, was a more eloquent response than any words. She took another spoonful. Eun-woo felt a lump in his throat. He had tried everything. The best child psychologists, the most experienced nannies, the most renowned chefs. No one had managed to break through the barrier Minji had built. And now, a woman he barely knew, with a bowl of pumpkin porridge and a simple story, was doing the impossible. The anger he usually felt at his own helplessness was being replaced by a confusing, almost frightening emotion. Gratitude. And something more, something he dared not name, but which pulsed in his chest like a distant drum. "It's a beautiful story, isn't it?" Ji-eun asked softly, without pressing. "Sometimes the simplest things have the most powerful stories." She watched Minji eat, her eyes gentle and patient. There wasn't the haste he saw in other adults, the eagerness for a result. There was just presence. Minji finished the bowl, something Eun-woo had never seen her do with such ease. She pushed the empty bowl aside and looked at Ji-eun, a gaze that seemed to ask for more, not of food, but of that connection, that warming story. Ji-eun picked up the glass of warm milk. "And the milk," she said, her voice a whisper, "is for the little son, to sleep soundly and warm after a day's work, so it can dream of new stories to tell tomorrow." Minji took the glass and drank slowly, her eyes never leaving Ji-eun's face. The scene was so intimate, so pure, that Eun-woo felt like an intruder. His icy facade wasn't just cracking, it was disintegrating, revealing a vulnerability he had buried deep within. He felt exposed, not to Ji-eun, but to himself. He had failed where she was succeeding, and the irony was that he felt no envy, but a strange sense of relief. The silence in the dining room was different now. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence from before, but a filled silence, a silence of contentment and a newfound connection. Eun-woo felt the warmth of the pumpkin porridge, not in his stomach, but in his heart. It was the little son's warm hug, and he knew with an overwhelming certainty that his life and Minji's would never be the same. The seed of an unexpected romance had been planted, not in fertile ground of passion, but in the cracks of a frozen heart, watered by the simplest kindness and the magic of a story told. There was only presence, a calm that filled the space between them. Cha Eun-woo remained motionless for a few more moments, feeling the weight of the revelation. The warmth in his chest was strange, almost painful in its intensity. He heard the soft sound of Ji-eun tidying the table, the discreet clinking of dishes being stacked. Minji, sitting at the table, watched Ji-un with a stillness that wasn't indifference, but attentiveness. Her small eyes followed every movement, as if wanting to absorb every bit of that warm presence before it was gone. Ji-un, finishing up, turned to Minji. "There you go, little son. Now it's time to go to bed and dream of new adventures." She knelt down, getting to the girl's height, and gently touched Minji's hair. The gesture was so natural, so full of affection, that Yunwoo felt a shiver run down his spine. Minji, for the first time in years, didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, like a kitten seeking affection. "Good night, Minji," Ji-un whispered, and the sound was like a soft melody in the silence of the room. Minji didn't respond with words, but her eyes met Ji-un's, and a slight, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It was a smile Yunwoo hadn't seen in so long he could barely remember what it looked like. That was the final blow. The icy facade completely crumbled, and Yunwoo felt an overwhelming need to move, to breathe, to confront this woman who had turned his world upside down in a single night. He stirred, a slow and calculated movement, feigning a sleepy awakening. A low groan escaped his lips as he stretched, his eyes slowly opening, first finding the ceiling, then the figure of Ji-un as she stood up. Ji-un turned, surprised. Her eyes widened slightly upon seeing Yunwoo awake. "Mr. Cha? I didn't know you were awake." Her voice was calm, but there was a slight flush on her cheeks. Yunwoo sat up, straightening his posture on the sofa. The weight of his gaze was intense, but there was something different about it now. It wasn't the usual coldness, but a mix of curiosity, confusion, and an emotion he still couldn't decipher. I must have dozed off," he lied, his voice a little hoarse. He looked at the table, at the empty bowl and the glass of milk. His eyes then fixed on Minji, who now looked at him with a softer expression than usual. "It seems Minji ate everything," he said, his voice more controlled than he felt. It was an observation, not a question, but there was an underlying current of astonishment. Ji-un nodded professionally. "Yes, sir. She liked the pumpkin porridge. It's a special recipe from my grandmother." "Special recipe?" Yunwoo repeated, his eyebrows slightly arched. He stood up, walking slowly to the table. His eyes met Ji-un's. "And the story?" Ji-un hesitated for a moment, surprised that he knew about the story. "Oh, yes, I thought it might help. Sometimes a story makes food more interesting for children." She avoided his direct gaze, feeling the weight of his presence. Yunwoo looked at Minji, who was still sitting, observing the interaction. "Minji," he called, his voice softer than usual. "Did you like the story?" Minji said nothing, but nodded, an almost imperceptible movement. Her eyes, however, shone with a new light, one that Yunwoo hadn't seen in a long time. A tense silence filled the room. Yunwoo felt himself on unfamiliar ground. The anger and frustration he expected to feel upon seeing his test fail, or ironically succeed in a way he hadn't foreseen, weren't there. Instead, there was a sense of disarmament. "Well," Yunwoo finally said, his voice resuming a more formal tone, but without the usual harshness. "It seems you passed the test, Lee Ji-un." He couldn't hide the surprise in his voice, nor the slight admiration. "No one has ever managed to make Minji eat like that." Ji-un merely gave a discreet bow. "It's a pleasure to serve, Mr. Cha." She maintained her composure, but inside she felt relief and a strange satisfaction. Yunwoo watched her. She wasn't boasting, nor did she seem to seek recognition, just professionalism and an innate kindness. He felt the warmth of the pumpkin porridge, not in his stomach, but in his heart. He had hired a cook, but he had found something much deeper, and the seed planted in his frozen heart was beginning to show its first fragile sprouts. The silence that followed was filled with a new tension, different from the usual coldness of the mansion. Yunwoo, still processing the avalanche of emotions, tried to compose himself. His gaze shifted from Ji-un to Minji, who now watched him with less wary curiosity. "Minji," he said, his voice still a little hoarse, but with a tone he himself didn't recognize. There was a softness, an attempt at connection he hadn't made in years. Are you ready for bed?" Minji, to Yunwoo's surprise, didn't flinch. She looked at Ji-un, as if seeking permission or comfort. Ji-un smiled gently at the girl. "Yes, little son, your father is right. It's time to rest." Yunwoo felt a slight pang of jealousy, a strange and unexpected feeling. Minji seemed more at ease with Ji-un than with him, her own father. It was a painful but undeniable truth. He cleared his throat, turning to Ji-un. "Well, Lee Ji-un, that's all for today. You can go rest." The phrase, which would normally be uttered with cold, distant authority, came out with an almost imperceptible hesitation. He couldn't maintain the facade. Ji-un bowed again. "Yes, Mr. Cha. Good night." She cast one last warm glance at Minji, who returned it with an almost imperceptible but significant nod. As Ji-un headed for the kitchen door, Yunwoo felt an irrational urge to call her back, to ask more questions, to understand how she had achieved what he, with all his power and wealth, had never accomplished. But he restrained himself, pride still battling against the vulnerability that was settling in. The kitchen door closed softly, leaving Yunwoo and Minji alone in the dining room. Silence returned, but now it was a different silence, laden with the memory of the warmth Ji-un had brought. Yunwoo knelt beside Minji, something he didn't do often. "Minji," he began, his voice a little firmer now, but still soft. Did you like the porridge?" Minji looked at him, her large, dark eyes. She nodded again, and then, to Yunwoo's shock, she uttered a single word, almost a whisper. "Son." Yunwoo blinked. "Son," he repeated, confused. Minji pointed towards the kitchen, where Ji-un had disappeared. "Little son," she murmured, repeating Ji-un's words. A genuine, painful smile formed on Yunwoo's lips. It was the first time in years Minji had spoken more than strictly necessary, and the first time she referred to someone with such affection. Ji-un wasn't just a cook. She was the little sun that had begun to melt the ice surrounding his daughter, and he realized with a shiver his own heart. He hugged Minji, an awkward and long-forgotten embrace. The girl, to his surprise, didn't pull away. He felt her small body relax in his arms. The seed had sprouted, and now Yunwoo knew he had to cultivate it. He had to understand Lee Ji-un, and perhaps he had to allow her to help him find his way back to his own daughter and to himself. Yunwoo held Minji tighter in his arms, feeling the fragile warmth of her body. It was an awkward embrace, yes, but not rejected. The relief that washed over him was so intense it almost made him sway. He carefully lifted her, feeling her light weight against his chest, and carried her to her room. With each step, the mansion's silence seemed less oppressive, as if the echo of Minji's words, "Little son," had dispelled some of the darkness. In Minji's room, he laid her on the bed, pulling the blanket up with a gentleness he hadn't used in years. He observed his daughter's sleeping face, an expression of peace he rarely saw. His fingers brushed her forehead, a hesitant gesture of affection. "Little son," he murmured, his voice choked. The image of Ji-un sitting at the table, telling the story with a soft voice and gentle eyes, flooded his mind. He had hired a cook, an employee, but she was much more than that. She was the bridge he didn't know how to build, the light he didn't know how to ignite. Back in the dining room, now empty and silent, Yunwoo felt the weight of his own loneliness. He sat in the chair where Ji-un had been, his eyes fixed on the empty porridge bowl. The seed had sprouted, yes, but the ground was still barren. He had failed as a father, allowing pain and grief to transform him into an impenetrable fortress. And now a young cook, with her simplicity and kindness, had exposed the fragility of his defenses. He stood up, walking to the window, observing the darkness of the garden. The arrogance that defined him seemed to drain away, replaced by an uncomfortable humility. He needed to understand, not just how she cooked, but how she was. How could she see Minji's soul when he, her own father, was blind? The night passed in a stupor of thoughts and self-criticism. The next morning, Yunwoo came down for breakfast with a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. The smell of fresh coffee and something sweet hung in the air. He found Ji-yun in the kitchen, already in full swing, preparing breakfast. She wore an impeccable white apron, her hair tied back, and her concentration was absolute. "Good morning, Mr. Cha," she said without turning, as if sensing his presence. Her voice was calm, professional. "Good morning, Lee Ji-yun," he replied, his voice a little softer than usual. He sat at the kitchen table, something he rarely did, preferring the formality of the dining room. "What's for breakfast?" Ji-yun turned, a slight smile on her lips. "Sweet potato pancakes with fresh fruit and a green smoothie, sir. I thought Minji might like it." Yunwoo nodded, watching her. She didn't seem at all intimidated by his unusual presence in the kitchen. "Minji, is she still sleeping?" "I haven't seen her yet, sir, but I can bring her breakfast when she wakes up." There was a brief silence as Ji-yun finished plating Yunwoo's dish. He watched her, trying to decipher the secret behind her calm and her ability to connect. "Lee Ji-yun," he began, his voice a little hesitant, "about last night." She looked at him, her eyes wide and expectant. I appreciate what you did for Minji," he continued, the words coming out with difficulty. It was the first time he had admitted gratitude to an employee so personally. She hasn't eaten like that in a long time, and she talked about you. She's a very sweet girl, Mr. Cha. She just needs a little affection and patience." "Patience," he repeated, almost to himself. He had everything but not that for his own daughter. "And the story," he added, feeling strangely vulnerable. She liked the story. "I'm glad to hear that," Ji-yun said, returning to her work. "It's an old story about a little son finding its way home." Yunwoo felt a shiver. A little son. It was exactly what Minji had said. He realized that Ji-yun wasn't just telling a story. She was planting a seed of hope, a metaphor for Minji herself. "Lee Ji-yun," he said, his voice now firmer with new determination. I would like you to continue preparing Minji's meals and to spend more time with her if possible." Ji-yun looked at him surprised, but her eyes shone with a silent understanding. "It will be a pleasure, Mr. Cha." Yunwoo knew he was opening a door he had kept locked for years, and for the first time in a long while he felt no fear, but a strange and promising anticipation. Ji-yun's little son wasn't just melting Minji's ice, it was beginning to warm his own heart. Ji-yun's acceptance broke the kitchen's silence, but a new layer of expectation, almost palpable, hung in the air. Yunwoo watched her as she finished preparing his dish, the sweet smell of pancakes and the citrus aroma of the smoothie filling the room. It was a different atmosphere than usual, less sterile, more alive. "Thank you, Lee Ji-yun," he said, the words sounding a little strange in his own ears. He wasn't used to expressing gratitude, much less feeling the need to do so with such sincerity. She placed the dish in front of him, a gentle smile on her lips. "It's my job, Mr. Cha." "No," he corrected, his voice firmer now, but without the harshness from before. "It's not just your job, what you did for Minji. It's more than any employee has ever done." He saw her blush slightly, and an unexpected warmth spread through him, a feeling he couldn't identify. He ate in silence, but his eyes never left Ji-Yun. She moved through the kitchen with quiet efficiency, preparing Minji's breakfast and arranging the utensils. There was a grace in her movements, a dedication that went beyond the simple execution of tasks. He wondered about her life, about what had led her to be so. Kind. Later that morning, Yunwoo was in his office trying to focus on financial reports, but his mind kept wandering. He heard a soft sound coming from the garden. Curious, he approached the window. There, under the shade of a large tree, sat Minji on a small bench, with Ji-Eun beside her. Ji-Eun was reading a book, her voice low and melodious, while Minji listened attentively, occasionally pointing to the illustrations. Yunwoo felt a tightening in his chest. How many times had he tried to read to Minji? His efforts always ended in frustration, with the girl closing herself off even more. But with Ji-Eun it was different. There was a connection, an ease he had never been able to replicate. He watched for a long time, the scene imprinting itself on his memory. Minji laughed, a soft and rare sound, and Yunwoo's heart seemed to leap. At lunchtime, Yunwoo decided to go downstairs. He found Ji-Eun and Minji in the dining room, where Ji-Eun had prepared a light lunch, small star-shaped sandwiches, and a colorful vegetable soup. Minji was eating, and even tried to pick up a sandwich herself, something she rarely did. "Mr. Cha," Ji-Eun said, rising slightly. "Please continue," he said, sitting at the head of the table, a place he normally occupied alone. The presence of Minji and Ji-Eun changed the dynamic of the room. It was no longer a cold and formal space, but a place where life seemed to flourish. "Minji is enjoying the soup," Ji-Eun informed, a smile in her eyes. "She even helped me choose the colors of the vegetables." Yunwoo looked at his daughter. "Is that right, Minji?" he asked, his voice soft. Minji nodded, her eyes fixed on her sandwich. She didn't speak, but the nod was progress. Yunwoo felt a strange pride, as if he himself had contributed to that small breakthrough. "Lee Ji-Eun," he said after a moment, Do you have children?" The question slipped out before he could stop himself. Too personal for an employer. Ji-Eun looked at him, surprised but not offended. "No, Mr. Cha, I don't. But I've always liked children. I had many nieces and nephews to look after when I was younger." Yunwoo nodded, absorbing the information. There was a naturalness in her interaction with Minji that he now understood a little better. It was her very nature, not just a learned skill. In the days that followed, the Cha mansion began to change. The sounds of Minji's soft laughter became more frequent, and the smell of fresh, comforting food permeated the hallways. Yunwoo found himself looking for Ji-Eun and Minji, observing them from afar, or finding excuses to be in the same room. He began to notice the small details, the way Ji-Eun arranged Minji's hair, the infinite patience in her eyes, the way she told stories with her hands. He realized he wasn't just observing his daughter, he was observing Ji-Eun. And each observation further chipped away at the layer of ice he had built around his own heart. The seed Ji-Eun had planted wasn't just for Minji, it was for him too. And he was beginning to feel the first sprouts of an emotion he had long forgotten. One afternoon, he found her in the kitchen preparing dinner. The light of the setting sun streamed through the window, illuminating her hair and the steam rising from a pot. She was humming a soft melody. "Lee Ji-Eun," he said, his voice lower than intended. She turned, her humming stopping abruptly. "Mr. Cha, do you need anything?" He approached, feeling a strange urgency. "No, I just wanted to see how Minji is doing." "She's in her room, drawing. She made a drawing for you today," she said, a sweet smile. Yunwoo felt a warmth spread in his chest. A drawing for him. It was a miracle. "Lee Ji-Eun," he said, his voice almost a whisper, You are changing everything here." She looked at him, her eyes meeting his, and for a brief moment the barrier between employer and employee seemed to disappear. There was a silent understanding, an unspoken promise. "I'm just trying to bring a little warmth, Mr. Cha," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "It's what we all need." Yunwoo nodded, unable to look away. He knew she was right. And he knew, with a certainty that both frightened and fascinated him, that he wanted more of that warmth. He wanted more of Lee Ji-eun. The seed had sprouted, and now he was ready to water it. The silence that followed in the kitchen was different from any other Yunwoo had ever experienced. It wasn't the cold, distant silence that had filled his mansion before, but a silence charged with a new and intense emotion. He felt Ji-eun's gaze on him, and for a moment the air seemed thin. "Mr. Cha?" she asked again, her voice a little softer, almost hesitant. Yunwoo blinked, as if coming out of a trance. He took a step back, trying to regain the composure that had always defined him. "Excuse me, Lee Ji-eun, I need to go." He turned abruptly and left the kitchen, leaving her behind with the interrupted melody and the smell of dinner. He went upstairs, but not to his office. Instead, he went to the balcony, seeking the fresh night air. What had just happened? He, Cha Yun-woo, the ruthless CEO, had allowed himself to be vulnerable, had admitted a need that went beyond the professional. More of that warmth, more of Lee Ji-eun. The words echoed in his mind, frighteningly clear. He wasn't just watching his daughter heal, he was watching himself be healed. In the following days, the Cha mansion continued its transformation. Minji now not only ate with appetite, but also asked for Ji-eun. She would wait for her in the kitchen in the morning, and in the afternoon, the two could be found in the garden, or in the library, where Ji-eun taught her to draw or read small words. Minji's laughter, once a rare and almost ghostly sound, was now a constant melody that filled the hallways. Yunwoo found himself increasingly present in these moments. He no longer hid in his office, but found excuses to be where they were. He watched Ji-eun with an intensity that surprised him. The way she tilted her head when listening to Minji, the patience in her eyes, the way her hands moved as she prepared meals, each detail was a new discovery. He realized it wasn't just the warmth he desired. It was the person who radiated it. One afternoon, he found them in the living room. Minji was sitting on the floor, focused on a coloring book, while Ji-eun sat on a nearby sofa, sewing a small cloth doll that Minji had requested. The scene was so domestic, so full of a peace he never imagined possible in his home, that he stopped at the doorway, just watching. "Mr. Cha," Ji-eun said, looking up and smiling. Her smile was always a ray of sunshine, but today it seemed to have a different glow. "Don't get up," he said, entering the room and sitting in a distant armchair. However, his eyes didn't leave her. "What are you doing?" "I'm finishing the little sun doll for Minji," she replied, showing the almost finished doll. It was a small yellow sun with an embroidered smile. Minji, hearing this, looked up. "Daddy, Ji-eun is making the sun from the story," she exclaimed, something she would never have done before, sharing her joy with him. He looked at Ji-eun, who smiled at Minji with an affection that deeply moved him. "It's beautiful, Minji," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "Ji-eun is very talented." Ji-eun blushed slightly, and her eyes met his. At that moment, the air in the room seemed to vibrate. The distance between them, physical and social, seemed to shrink. There was an electric current, a silent promise passing between them. "Lee Ji-eun," he began, his voice lower, almost a whisper. I'd like to talk to you about something. Later, when Minji is asleep." She looked at him, the surprise in her eyes quickly replaced by a silent understanding. She nodded, a slight curve on her lips. "Of course, Mr. Cha." Yunwu knew he was about to cross a threshold. He had felt the warmth, had seen the seed sprout. Now it was time to water it consciously and deliberately. He was ready to face whatever this new emotion meant, and he hoped, with an anxiety he hadn't felt in years, that Ji-un was ready too. The Cha mansion had found its warmth, and he was ready to find his own. Min-ji, with the little sun doll firmly embraced, finally bid farewell to Ji-un and her father, going upstairs with the housekeeper. The sound of her footsteps faded until it disappeared, and a silence different from before settled in the living room. It wasn't the vibrant silence from before, but a heavy silence, foreshadowing something important. Ji-un felt her heart quicken. She finished putting away her sewing materials, her hands trembling slightly, while Yunwu, in turn, rose from the armchair and walked to the window. He watched the darkness outside, but without truly seeing it, trying to organize his thoughts. The courage that had driven him to extend the invitation now mingled with an unknown anxiety. Ji-un waited, unsure whether she should go to the kitchen or stay. The tension was almost palpable. An invisible thread stretched between them. "Lee Ji-un," Yunwu's voice sounded, a little lower than usual, calling her back. He turned from the window, his eyes meeting hers. "Please, sit down." She obeyed, choosing the same sofa where she had been sewing, while he sat in the opposite armchair, the same one he occupied when observing her. The distance between them seemed greater now, laden with meaning. Yunwu took a deep breath, his usual formality battling against the vulnerability he was about to expose. I don't quite know where to begin." He hesitated, something rare for CEO Cha, a man who always knew exactly what to say. "Since you arrived, this house, Min-ji, everything has changed." Ji-un nodded softly, her eyes fixed on him. "Min-ji is a wonderful girl, Mr. Cha. She just needed a little affection and attention." "Attention," he repeated, his eyes fixed on her, the intensity almost making her hold her breath. "But it wasn't just that, Ji-un. It was your way, the way you listened to her, the way you made her laugh, the way you nourished her with your stories and your food. No one ever achieved that, not even me." He paused, the vulnerability in his voice a new and surprising sound. "I watched her, and not just Min-ji. I watched you." Ji-un felt a blush rise to her face. His intense gaze made her feel exposed, but in a strangely comfortable way, as if he were seeing the part of her that no one else saw. "When I saw you with Min-ji that first night," he continued, his voice almost a whisper, "I was pretending to sleep. I wanted to test you, but what I saw, what I felt, it froze me." He smiled bitterly, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Me, CEO Cha, frozen, and then something broke. That ice I thought protected me." He leaned forward, the intensity in his eyes increasing. "You brought warmth to this house, Ji-un. A warmth I didn't know I needed, a warmth I didn't know existed. And it's not just for Min-ji, it's for me too." He stood up and walked a few steps, turning to her again, determination now visible on his face. "I told myself I wanted more of that warmth, more of Lee Ji-un." The words spoken aloud seemed to carry even greater weight, filling the space between them. "The seed has sprouted, Ji-un, and I am ready to water it." Ji-un listened to him with her heart in her throat. She never imagined he could feel or express something like this. The initial surprise gave way to a wave of emotions. She too had felt the change, the subtle attraction, the prolonged gazes that had become more frequent. "Mr. Cha," she began, her voice soft, I don't know what to say. I just wanted to help Min-ji. She's such a sweet child." "And you did," he interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "But you did more than that. You made me see what I was missing, the loneliness I carried, the coldness I allowed to define me." He took another step towards her, further closing the distance. I don't want that anymore. I want to try something different. With you. Ji-Yun stood up, the distance between them now minimal. Her eyes met his, and the electric current he had felt before now pulsed between them, undeniable. She could see the sincerity, the vulnerability, and the hope in his eyes. And she realized that, somewhere in her own heart, a similar seed had also sprouted. I felt it too, she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. I felt the change in the house, in Minji, and in you, and I also felt something. She hesitated, but his encouraging gaze spurred her on. I also wanted more of that warmth, Mr. Cha. A slow, genuine smile spread across Yunwoo's face, a smile Ji-Yun had never seen before. It wasn't the arrogant smile or the forced business smile, but a smile that came from the soul. Lighting up his eyes, he extended his hand, and Ji-Yun, without hesitation, took it. The touch was soft, but laden with a promise of an uncertain but desired future. It was the touch of two people who, against all odds, had found each other in the midst of coldness and loneliness. "Yunwoo," he said, his voice hoarse, his eyes fixed on hers, formality finally abandoned. "Please, call me Yunwoo." Ji-Yun felt a shiver run down her spine. "Yunwoo," she repeated, the name sounding strangely natural on her lips, as if it had always belonged there. At that moment, the Cha mansion, once a monument to coldness and isolation, seemed to breathe with new life. The warmth Ji-Yun had brought was no longer just a seed, it was a flame, ready to be nurtured, and both were ready to warm themselves in it. The chapter of their lives, once written in shades of grey, was about to be filled with the vibrant colours of love and hope. The name Yunwoo hung in the air between them, a soft and intimate sound that dissolved the last barriers of formality. Ji-Yun felt the warmth of his palm in hers, and a shiver different from before, one of pure anticipation, ran through her body. Yunwoo's eyes, once so cold and distant, now shone with an intensity that invited her to lose herself in them. He gently squeezed her hand, and the gesture was a silent invitation to draw even closer. "Ji-Yun," he said, his voice a little firmer now, but still laden with emotion. He took another step, and the distance between their bodies became almost non-existent. He raised the hand he held, slowly bringing it to his face. His skin was warm, and Ji-Yun felt a wave of tenderness flood over her. She didn't need words. Just her gaze, full of a newfound tenderness, was the answer. She felt the desire to touch his face too, to feel the texture of his skin, to erase the marks of years of loneliness. And so she did. Her free hand rose, hesitant at first, and then with more confidence, to touch his cheek. Yunwoo closed his eyes for an instant, as if absorbing the touch, the connection. "What do we do now, Yunwoo?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible, but full of hopeful curiosity. He opened his eyes, and a genuine smile, one that reached every corner of his eyes, formed on his lips. "Now, Ji-Yun," he began, his voice hoarse, "we're going to water this seed. We're going to see what it becomes." He gently pulled her closer, and Ji-Yun didn't resist, feeling the warmth of his body. "I want to take you to dinner, not as my cook, but as the woman who brought light into my life, the woman who made me feel again." Ji-Yun's heart skipped a beat. A dinner, a date. It was a huge step, a leap out of the employer-employee dynamic. I'd love to, Yunwoo," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. "But what about Minji?" He chuckled softly, a sound she never thought she'd hear from him, a sound so full of joy and lightness. "Minji is the reason all this began. She'll understand. She'll be happy. She already loves you, Ji-Yun. And I love you too." Those last words, spoken with such profound sincerity, resonated in Ji-Yun's soul. He wasn't just talking about Minji. He was talking about her. The "I love you too" was an echo of what she felt, but hadn't yet dared to express aloud. "I love you too, Yunwoo," she whispered, the confession escaping her lips before she could think to contain it. His smile deepened, and his eyes filled with an emotion that mirrored hers. He tilted his head, and Ji-yoon felt the warmth of his breath on her face. The world seemed to shrink, and all that existed was the space between them, the promise of a kiss that was about to come. Their lips met in a soft, hesitant touch at first, but one that quickly deepened with the passion and tenderness they had both held back for so long. It wasn't a kiss of urgency, but of recognition, of relief, of a connection that transcended words. It was the kiss that sealed the end of an era of loneliness and the beginning of a shared future. When they parted, the air in the living room was charged with a different energy, one that was no longer of tension, but of love and hope. Yunwoo embraced her, wrapping her in his arms, and Ji-yoon nestled against him, feeling at home for the first time in a long while. "This house," he murmured against her hair, "will never be cold again." Ji-yoon smiled, feeling his warmth, the warmth she had brought, and which he now shared with her. The Cha mansion, once a symbol of his arrogance and isolation, was now a sanctuary of love and family. The little sun she had sewn for Min-ji was not just a doll. It was a symbol of the warmth she had brought into Yunwoo's and Min-ji's lives, and which now illuminated her own life too. Chapter 15:15 was not the end, but the true beginning. The beginning of a story that finally had all the vibrant colors it deserved.